All right, today we're diving into a topic that is genuinely mind-bending. We're going to unpack some really sophisticated mathematical patterns that researchers claim are woven into the very fabric of the Quran. I mean, just think about that for a second. What if a book revered for its spiritual and literary power for over 1,400 years also has these layers of numerical code that we're only now starting to see with our modern tools? It's a huge idea. So let's get into it. So at the very core of this whole conversation is this concept from Islamic tradition called ijaz. It's this idea that the Quran is miraculous. And for centuries, that miracle was all about its language. Its poetic beauty was considered impossible to replicate. But now people are looking at it from a totally different angle, a structural, numerical one that some say is a miracle all on its own. So the big question is, right? Could these patterns actually be evidence of some kind of divine blueprint? This whole field of study is really interesting because it kind of acts like a bridge between faith and science, using the universal language of math to look at a sacred text. Now, it's super important to remember the idea of finding meaning in numbers, especially in holy books, is not new at all. I mean, you go way back to ancient Babylonians using symbolic numbers. Then you have the Greek philosopher Pythagoras saying everything is number. You even have gematria in Hebrew texts. So when the Quran was revealed in the 7th century, it entered a world that was already thinking this way. The argument, though, is that the patterns found inside it are on a whole other level of complexity.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty and see how this actually works. We're going to start with a really cool interconnected pattern that involves adding and multiplying certain chapter numbers. So here's how researchers approach this. First, they zeroed in on a very specific, very small group of chapters, or surahs. They looked for the only chapters with single-digit numbers that also start with these special, mysterious letters called muqattat. And it turns out there are only 3, chapters 2, 3, and 7. Okay, so what happens when you add those chapter numbers together? You get 12.
Now here's where it gets interesting. That number, 12, just so happens to be the same sum you get from the classic 3, 4, 5 Pythagorean triplet. You know, a cornerstone of geometry. It's like these two different worlds, a sacred text and ancient math, are speaking a similar language of harmony. Pretty neat, right? But wait, it doesn't stop there. If the sum gives us something interesting, what about another basic operation? What happens if we multiply those same 3 chapter numbers, 2, 3, and 7? You do the math. 2 times 3 is 6, times 7, and you get 42. So we have 12 from the sum and 42 from the product. Now you have to ask, is 42 a significant number here? And yes, it absolutely is. That number, 42, is the exact chapter number of another surah that also starts with those special muqatta'at letters. It's Surah Ash-Shura. So you see the connection? The product of one set of special chapters points you directly to the location of another one. It suggests a link that's encoded right into the structure. Okay, let's look at another batch of patterns. This time, we're going to see how researchers found these things called quadratic echoes and a really surprising connection to astronomy. First, just some basic context. Of the Quran's 114 chapters, they fall into 2 buckets. You've got 85 chapters that are considered non-muqatta'at, and then you have 29 that do have those special opening letters. Now that number, 29, that's the one to watch. Keep it in your back pocket. Okay, now check out how this number 29 shows up again in a completely wild way. Researchers took a chapter number, like chapter 50, Surah Qaf. They squared its digits, so 5 squared plus 0 squared, and got 25. Okay, then they did the same thing to that result, 25. So 2 squared plus 5 squared equals 29. There's our number again. But it gets even crazier. If you do it one more time with 29, 2 squared plus 9 squared gives you 85, which is the exact chapter number of another important surah, Al-Buruj. It creates this perfect self-referential loop. And the connections around that chapter 85 just keep stacking up. That chapter has 22 verses. Now, think about the mathematical constant pi. The ancient way to estimate pi was the fraction 22 over 7.
Well, what happens if you just take the number of verses, 22, and add the bottom number of that fraction, 7? Yep, you get 29. Again, so let's just take a breath here. You have the number of special chapters, this quadratic echo thing, and a connection to pi, all landing on the number 29. And here's the final amazing link. 29 also mirrors the lunar cycle. You know, the moon takes about 29.5 days to go through its phases, which is the very foundation of the Islamic calendar. It all seems to connect.
We've just walked through some seriously intricate patterns. But what does it all mean? And this really gets us to the core of the whole debate. Is this evidence of a divine architect, or is it just a bunch of really compelling coincidences?
So, on one side, you have the argument for divine design. Proponents say, look, these patterns are just too interconnected, too complex to be random chance. This must be a divine signature of sorts. On the other side, though, you have the argument for coincidence. Critics and skeptics would say, hang on, the human brain is a pattern-finding machine. If you look hard enough in any large set of data, you're going to find patterns. They warn about cherry-picking the results that fit and point out that we're using modern math to analyze an ancient text. And really, the most balanced view probably comes from the researchers in this field themselves. They often stress that the key is to be rigorous with the math, to be totally transparent, but also to stay open. It's about balancing the search for mathematical truth without losing sight of the text's spiritual meaning.
So, after exploring all the evidence and the arguments on both sides, where does that actually leave us? What have we really seen today? So let's just do a super quick recap of this web of connections. We saw simple math like addition and multiplication, where the results pointed to other chapters. Then things got more complex, with those strange quadratic loops that just kept cycling back on themselves. And through it all, we saw that one number, 29, acting like a bridge, connecting the book's internal structure to fundamental constants of math, and even the cycle of the moon.
And all of this brings us right back to that final, profound question. Does this hidden harmony point to a grand, supernatural design? An intelligence that encoded this into the text centuries ago? Or does it reflect something deep inside of us, our own powerful, innate human drive to find order and see meaning in the world around us? It really makes you think, what do we even consider a miracle in our modern, data-driven world?